Well, hey folks, Steve here with the first video, sort of the introduction video for a new series that will focus on 1918 Storm in the West, or 1918-1919 Storm in the West, but will really be focused on the 1918 part of that equation. So this video will be, it might be a little long, but this is going to get us back into the mode of some of my other videos where we definitely take our time and kind of really explore a game. And you know, we've been taking this thing cradle to grave, basically, is the goal. So we're going to get the 1918's base game scenario set up, and we're going to play through the 16 turns, or at least until there's a game victory, myself against myself. So we're going to get into that here today. And I have not set up the game yet. You can see I'm sort of prepped. So we got the game box, nice and pretty over there. We've got the two-player aid charts set up over here, one face down, one face up, so I can see both sides. I might shuffle things around as I go. Got our rule book. There's very minor errata that I have to incorporate here yet, but we'll worry about that in time. I have flipped through the rules. I've got some of it kind of figured out. It's relatively straightforward, but we'll take our time and kind of get into things as we go. Now I'm going to bring the camera closer to allow myself the ability to zoom in on certain parts of the map. But you know, you can see I've got the counters kind of situated and organized. I have a little baggie that has all the 1919 variant counters separate from this set, and it's sitting inside the box over there. So we're not going to be doing anything with the 1919 counters in this series. We're going to focus on the 1918 scenario. But that doesn't mean, you know, at some point in the future I don't come back and do the 1919 stuff. All my counters are punched. They're nice and thick. I was able to punch them very easily and sort of get them organized. There's not that many counters, so the level of organization I went to probably isn't that needed. But it's all good there. And yeah, we can kind of take a look at the map and kind of see what we got. So there's some dead pile boxes over there. The turn track, going from turn 1 to turn 16, so 16 total turns. Each side will get to go 16 times in the game. And then there's this sort of all-encompassing data track up here that marks some beginning locations of certain markers and then is otherwise just used for tracking purposes. There's an awful lot of space taken up by this. I don't know if it's really needed, but it is there. And there's some terrain key stuff, nothing too much to worry about. So let's just sort of take in the map for a second. So this is the Western Front, or at least the French and German part of the Western Front, as of, I guess that depends on whether or not you count the Italian Front as part of the Western Front. I don't know, I don't want to get into that. But this is the primary Western Front theater of World War I, and this is the state of things in 1918, very specifically. The game starts in March of 1918. So it's still, you know, the early part of the year. The war doesn't end until November. This game runs until the beginning of November. So it sort of lines up a little bit when basically the war was going to be over and they signed the peace treaty on November 11th or whatever, right? So really the critical stage, the final stage of the war here on the Western Front. The front line cuts through Belgium a little bit. There's a handful of hexes right over here that the Allies control of Belgium, but most of Belgium is behind the German lines. And you can see the trench lines that run from the coast all the way down this way. Now, if you're familiar with some of other games by Ted Racer, you might say, hey, this map looks a whole lot like the map from Glory's End, 1914 Glory's End. And it is. It's very similar. I may want to do another Fun with Maps video comparing the two. Now, they're at a slightly different scale. The map is kind of, you know, focused on a slightly differentiated geographic area, but it is very close, very similar, just not quite. It's not like they did not take the Glory's End map and add trench lines. This is a fresh map. It is different. You know, landmarks are different number of hexes away because it's, again, a slightly different scale. But if you put them side by side, they would look awfully similar. And I guess it'd be kind of interesting to play, you know, 1914 Glory's End, and then sort of turn around and play 1918 Storm in the West. That might be a fun thing to do, play back to back. But some of the critical things that are worth pointing out here is that where we're going to do setup is along these primary trench lines. There's a secondary set of trenches here for the German side that exist. They're not quite as good as the main trench line. The trenches are going to provide bonuses, obviously, as one can imagine. So, a focus of some of this game is going to be around getting a breakthrough to get through and past the trench lines and then get further afield and capture important locations. The game is really based around morale points. So you're going to have a starting value of morale points, and critical places on the map are going to give you morale points or take away morale points from your enemy. And so just as an example, if we take a look at Paris, which is obviously a very important place on the map, each Paris hex, while protected by fort hex sides, as you can see, those are fort hex sides, and the river sign, each hex of Paris counts for 5 morale points, which is a lot, I believe, in terms of the game scale. It's a lot. Now, other places like Soissons, I'm not sure how to say that, is 2 morale points. Compiègne is 2. Château Thierry is 1. So, I mean, basically any major town in this region of the map is going to give up a certain number of morale points for one side or the other. The hex terrain that we'll be looking at, for the most part, there's a lot of clear. There are scattered forest hexes. You can see some hill-type terrain, or they refer to it as they do refer to it as mountains, but there's also rough. So yeah, all of this is really rough, not mountains necessarily. There's mountains on the southeast end of the map. And very interestingly, a big difference between this and maybe Glory's End is up here you see a whole lot of sort of like pockmarked terrain that's devastated terrain, and it reflects the artillery bombardment of that area throughout World War I. So there's a lot, terrain will be important as we play through this, I think. There's a few other odd, terrain bits, like there's some swamp down here, marshlands, marsh they call it. There's that floodplain. Okay, so yeah, if in the wet season, these hexes that are green are going to be more of a problem. They're going to be treated as marsh. So you have all these different sort of, twists on the terrain, and then you have minor and major rivers that are going to also be a factor. So you can imagine that even once you get beyond the trenches in this game, that these other terrain bits are going to have an effect on the game. So even if you try to make a breakthrough, there's still a potential for some issues along the way. Some important things up here in the northwest. So there are the channel ports of Boulogne, Calais, and Dunkirk. Those are going to serve as supply points for the British Commonwealth units. So they can use the way the supply works in this game is they can use other sources of supply, I believe, but they are required, there's a penalty for that. And so the Central Powers do have an incentive if they're going to break through, or if they can get down here to take those ports. There is an incentive to do that. I believe once they capture those ports, they cannot be used as supply ports, even if the Allies take them back. I think I remember reading something like that in the rulebook. Now, whether or not the Central Powers will even get close to that, I don't know. Also, throughout this video and other videos, I may accidentally call the Central Powers the Axis Powers. That is purely because I'm coming off a World War II game, so I apologize. The Central Powers are not the Axis Powers. If I say that by accident in the future, please forgive me. Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting way to go. Now, there's some important things that influence the way the game is going to go. One of those is that of the 16 turns, the Germans are going to be on the sort of operational offensive for probably the first half of the game, it seems like. So it's really their last major offensive, their last opportunity, their last bit of momentum they have to give into the war effort. And if they are able to achieve a certain threshold of morale points and spaces taken, then they can win. But they also have a threshold that if they don't meet, they will lose. So they can't, the way the game is structured, the Germans can't just sit there for the first half of the game and do nothing. They will have to try to make a breakthrough with their shock troopers, stormtroopers, and get somewhere, and make some ground, take some ground, and get close to Paris. If they can take Paris, hey, great, but I doubt that's going to happen. From that point on, assuming the Germans do well enough to at least stay in the game, the Allies are really going to have the strategic initiative and offensive against the Germans. And that's going to be, in large part, due to the Americans being present in more full force, the usage of tank units, a greater usage of tank units over time. And it's really going to come down to those morale points at the end. Now, all throughout that, there's going to be the potential for weather changing. So there's an optional rule where you can have the weather as the historical weather. I think I'm going to let that be random, just for fun. But there are a number of other optional rules that are kind of worth looking at. So there's a optional rule for the Australian American Corps, which you can get after turn 9 by stacking 2 infantry divisions in the Australian Corps. And then they get a special marker on them, and they're basically a really strong unit, and they have some bonuses. So we'll include that. That seems like a nice bit of chrome. There's also 1918's influenza epidemic. I think we're going to include that. You know, I mean, we're in the middle of our own pandemic at the moment in 2020, but we'll include the influenza optional rule. That seems interesting. There are some rules about some weak trenches in the British sector. We'll probably include that optional rule as we get into it. Belgian demoralization, I think that is one that we'll include for fun. Allied naval evacuation we'll include because that makes sense to me. Big Bertha we will include. There's an optional rule about how Big Bertha is used, which is the big artillery piece, really big artillery piece that I think they were looking to shell Paris with. Stoßtruppen attack casualties. I'll probably include that special rule as well. 16.8 super high odds attacks. I'll probably do that one, and then the Paris gun. So really, I mean, if you want to look at the rules PDF, which is available on GNT's website, I'm going to use this is section 16. You know, with optional rules. I'm going to use all the optional rules except for historical weather. I could do historical weather, I guess, but to me, the fun is the randomness of that. So it's going to be, you know, if I know the weather's going to be good these turns, I would act differently than if I didn't know they were going to be good. So to me, that means I should play with random weather and deal with the randomness of that, and not get to be super knowledgeable in what's about to happen or what will happen. That seems fair to me, or more fair from that perspective. So that's what we'll do there. And then, let's see, anything else? No, I think that's it. So we'll do those special rules. I'll try to keep them in mind as I go and point out when they matter. And everything else seems like it should be straightforward stuff. So I'm going to look to do setup here. Now what I'll do is we can talk about what the setup is supposed to be, and then I'll take care of it, and then we can put it on camera. But the main thing is they point out all units begin the game at full strength. All reinforcements enter play at full strength. The control is going to be on either side of the beginning trench lines. That makes sense, right? And so here's the Allied setup is pretty straightforward. We're going to put 2 Belgian units, two corps in one hex and another 2 in another hex up this way. And there's specific hexes called out for that, and I think there's only 4 Belgian corps anyway, so that is straightforward. All British infantry corps in any Allied trench hexes lying between a band of hexes and another band of hexes, inclusive. I'm paraphrasing, but it's along up here. We'll get to place the British units. More than 1 corps may be placed per hex. Place the British Cavalry Corps and Royal Tank Corps in any Allied-controlled non-trench hexes north of the 2700 row. So basically, we're going to put the infantry and the hexes, and then cavalry and tanks are going to be a little bit behind within the British sector of control. When British placement is completed, all Allied trench hexes within their sector of the front must contain one or more British units or a British zone of control. Set the British air power unit aside temporarily. Okay, so just basically saying, like, we have to at least have a unit in every other hex or in every hex in their sector. And there are some spots on the map that are designated for British hexes, so that's straightforward. For the French, we're going to place all French infantry corps in any Allied trench and fort hexes on a different sector of the map, which is going to basically be the rest of the line. More than one corps may be placed per hex. We're going to place the 3 French cavalry corps and the assault artillery corps in non-trench hexes south of a certain row. French cavalry and tanks may not set up in the frontline fortresses of Reims, I'm not sure how to say that, I'm sorry, and Verdun. When French placement is completed, all Allied trench hexes in their sector of the front must contain one or more French units or a French zone of control. So same thing, right? The game is sort of forcing us to, by and large, fill the front line with units, and there's a few units that are going to be sort of set up behind, and we can, we have some selection in where we want to put those guys, but nothing too crazy. And then finally, the Germans will set up, they are going to set up second, I guess, out of the two sides. They're going to place all German infantry and Stoßtruppen in any German main trench hexes, so that all those main trench hexes contain one or more German units or zones of control. The AGB unit, which is a special heavy artillery unit, can be placed in any German-controlled non-main trench hex. Place Big Bertha in 2631, and the German air power aside temporarily. There are Allied units with numbers in the upper right corners of their counter. They don't start play on map and will enter play during the game turn shown by that number. All U.S. units are reinforcements. The Allied player should sort out all his reinforcement units into piles corresponding to the game turn of entry. The German side receives no reinforcements, but then there's some note about 8.3 for the Germans, which is regarding sapping German offensive spirit. Yes. There are certain German units with a dot on them. They equate and are equivalent basically to an assault unit. So I have them organized in their own bag, like so. So you can see there is a 14th Corps that is an assault unit. There is, oh, right there, convenient, 14th Corps infantry version with a dot on it. So basically, there will reach a point where after turn 9, if the Germans haven't won the game, some of their assault troops will turn into regular infantry units and be a little bit weaker on the attack, and they will have reduced movement. So you don't set up the dot units, you set them aside, and your assault units will turn into those later. That's a penalty sort of thing. Let's see. Anything else? Yeah, I think that is it. And that is that thing I just explained with the shock troopers and the infantry. I want to point out that's an important thing. The rules aren't they aren't super duper clear on it. I just want to make sure. Yeah, those substitute units are not set up. Right, they're off map for that. Pretty sure. The rules I'm trying to find. I'm sure it says it explicitly somewhere because it's in my brain and I must remember it from something, but I don't have that immediately on my mind. And yeah, so I think I can do setup from here, guys. And once I do, we can get the game started. There's really not much more to it than that. Because this is Hex Encounter, there are no cards, there's nothing like that, there's no chits even. It'll just be we start with the German player turn, and then we'll play through and go to the Allied and back and forth all the way through the game. So I'm going to take care of setup, and because I do have a little leeway in like where I set certain things up, I may need to sit back and kind of like think through strategy, but we'll show this complete setup before the end of this video. So if you're watching this right now, end of the video isn't quite yet, we'll do setup and I'll talk through that as well. Okay, I didn't do setup. I have a couple of things I'm thinking through that I want to talk about on camera before I set up the counters, because once the counters are all on the map, then it gets a lot harder to talk to what I want to talk about. So before I even set up, I want to talk through the overall strategic objectives of either side, and what we can expect to have happen. So both sides start with 15 morale. So there will be morale markers I put up here. They start in the 15 space. 15 each, basically. And Ted in the rulebook kind of speaks to, you put all the situation of the battles and the territory taken and everything else. They start from a tide point. So how do you win the game? Well, it's all about morale, and that morale is largely based on territory held. There's two exceptions to that. One is that the Allies can have their morale increased by 1 by having enough U.S. units on the map, and so it's almost like a natural one that they'll get. They can also get one when the Big Bertha, German counter Big Bertha, is no longer on the map. The Allies also get a +1 of their morale. The other thing about those exceptions are, they are the only exceptions that exist in adjusting morale that doesn't negatively affect the Germans. So if we seize territory that have a morale impact, you add the morale to the side that gained the hex, and then you minus the morale from the other side. So if the Germans take, Soissons, then their morale goes up by 2, the Allies go down by 2. But again, the Allies are going to get those bonus 2 that do not negatively affect the German morale. The other thing to keep in mind is that if either side reduces their opponent's morale down to 0 at the end of a turn, meaning the Allies still have, if the Germans put the Allies in a bad spot, the Allies have a chance to get it back. But if they fail to do that, if either side is at 0 morale at the end of a turn, the other side wins. So you can conceivably win the game by doing so particularly well, seizing enough morale spaces that your opponent has lost 15 morale points worth of hexes, again adjusting for the potential freebie 2 that the Allies could conceivably get at some point. So you could see, like the Germans, smash through and they capture Paris, or they capture a lot of stuff all across the map, and the Allies go down to 0 morale, Germans win. If the Allies do the same, then they'll win. So those are sort of like the automatic victory conditions. Obviously, that requires you doing well all over the map, or doing very well in particular areas of the map. That's one thing. The other thing that needs to happen is that come turn 9, at the end of the German player's turn, player turn, on game turn 9, they have to make a morale check. So they have up through basically that half of the game, through turn 9, their action on turn 9, to get enough morale points that they need to pass a check. So what needs to happen is that they have to have 18 or more morale, and the Allies must have 13 or lower. So that does allow the Allies to get a bonus in there somewhere, but basically it essentially means that the Germans will have taken at least 3 morale point areas away from the Allies. That's the first half of the game. That's the Germans' sort of initial offensive capability. Now, they can meet that via a number of ways. And if we look at places all over the map, we can kind of see where they could pick up 3. Up here in the north, if they take Ypres, then that's 2 points. And if they manage to push to Belhune or Hazebrouck, I'm not going to be able to pronounce French things, I'm so sorry. If they can make a strong offensive in the north, they can pretty easily pick up 3 points there. If they're able to get into Dunkirk, either by itself or in addition to any of these things, that's enough. Now, it doesn't matter. It does matter that they hold it at turn 9, so it doesn't help them if they take Dunkirk and then lose Dunkirk, get pushed back. They'll still fail that morale check and lose the game immediately. They have to gain somewhere, so they have to hold it to turn 9. So it's about taking that territory and then holding it if they haven't created like this huge breakthrough. Obviously, there are morale points beyond Dunkirk in those immediate areas, but 3 being the minimum, they could get something over here. Arras is worth 2, so that might be a nice pickup. As we look down the line, there are other good areas. Over here, Compiègne, I'm sure I'm butchering this, I'm so sorry. And Soissons together, that's 4, so that would be enough. Reims is 3. That would be enough by itself, but it is a fort, so it would be tough to take. Of course, beyond it are several morale points that are worth taking. Verdun is worth 5, and in fact, the designer notes point that out as an obvious objective. There's also Toul worth 2 and Nancy versus 2, so that's worth a shot, maybe. And then Epinal's worth 2, but that's kind of way out of the way, and you're unlikely to be down there by itself. So basically passing that check means the Germans have done well enough in one sector of the map, and they haven't lost morale elsewhere. That's the other thing, is that you have to kind of, you can't let the Allies kind of counterattack early and kind of knock you off balance. You have to hold what you have and then make some progress somewhere to stay in the game. If you fail to do that, if you fail to even take any territory at all, the Allies win the game. Straight up. So, yeah, there you go. Now, you can imagine if, you're going to go for an automatic victory, that's a tougher thing. And my camera's dying, so I'm going to try to plug it in and keep the camera going. I should have charged it before I recorded this, but oh well. Okay. So if we think about okay, what if you wanted to win the game outright? Is there enough morale in any one sector to deal that knockout blow as the Germans? Well, if we looked in the north and say we got Arras, that's 2, Belhune, that's 1, Hazebrouck, that's 1, so that's 4, Ypres is another 2, so that's 6, Dunkirk 3 is 9, Calais is 12, and Boulogne is 15. That could be enough, actually. So if you were really trying to strategize it, you could say, and I'm just going to use this baggie of counters as a marker, if you stay on that side of the Somme, north of the baggie there, where the Somme River is, if you manage to clear that out and take all of those spaces, that's roughly 15 morale points, right? Boulogne 3, Calais 3, Dunkirk 3, that's 9. Ypres, Hazebrouck. Yeah, basically everything north of the baggie, of the Somme River, is 15 morale points. So, again, in the first, if you could really concentrate and say, that's my pathway to victory, is the northern sector, I'm going to push through the Belgians, the remnants of the Belgians, I'm going to push through the British, I'm going to take their channel ports, and I'm going to win outright. That's how you could do it in terms of strategy, certainly. What about south of the Somme? Well, there's certainly some places over here at Abbeville, Amiens, that are worth 4 points. That's a decent chunk. What you're probably doing, if you're going in the center, is making a big old play for Paris, which, I don't know, that's going to be a tough gig, right? You could pick up Compiègne or Soissons, that's 4. You're probably taking Reims at that point, so that's total 7, 8, and really any couple of hexes from Paris is enough. I mean, Paris by itself is enough, but you're so deep into French territory, it would be tough. But even just this general center sector here is probably enough. So let's figure it out. Compiègne is 2, Soissons 2, so 4. Chateau Thierry is 5, 8, 10, 12. So actually, even This whole sector here by itself is not enough. If you're going to go for the center, you really got to push for Paris. You got to kind of pick a path and take at least one hex of Paris for that to work. And then in the southeast, to be honest, there's not enough there by itself. If you picked up Verdun for 5, Toul for 2, and Nancy for 2, that's only 9 points. Epinal could get you up to 11, but that's not an outright victory. So in terms of like how you want to pick your win for the Germans on the offensive, again, you could focus on the north and take care of the north and sort of cut the British out of the game a little bit. That would be enough for an auto victory. Otherwise, each sector of the map more or less has enough victory points or morale hexes to get enough to survive the turn 9 check. But then what happens, right? Because the game goes beyond that. Well, the rest of the game is predicated then on if you're going to, once you've survived a turn 9, if you don't win but you pass the check as the Germans, you're going to spend the rest of the game through the end of turn 16 on the strategic defensive or the operational defensive as the Allies try to defeat you. The victory conditions then shift. If the Germans can make it to the end of turn 16 with basically 1 or more morale points, they actually win the game. And I had to double check. I'm like, okay, so how does that occur, right? And it says, if by the end of game turn 16, the German morale marker is still in a box greater than 0, as in 1 or higher, the German is declared the winner. So what does that mean for the Allies? Well, the Allies, similarly, are going to have to be pretty heavily on the offensive at that juncture. And they're going to have to push the Germans back out of any territory that they've taken up to that point. So pushing them back down from 18 to 15 at least. But then they have to do very well. They have to take 15 more morale points. And the Germans don't get any bonuses or anything like that, like the Allies. So it really is just territory taken from the Germans. And apparently from the designer strategy notes, some of that's going to come down to trying to whittle away the German army so you can seize the territory. Now, historically, in 1918, the 100 Days offensives and all the offensives in the late part of 1918 did manage to take back some French territory and, in fact, managed to take back parts of Belgium. They never really got into Germany proper. So the front line shifts, but it doesn't shift so much that they're in German territory. And I was trying to figure out, I was comparing a historical map I found of the end of the 100 Days offensive, like where were the front lines at when the war ended before the German army just sort of disappeared, basically, and they mutinied and all that kind of stuff. The revolution happened in Germany. What's the historical end of this game? Well, it's a tough thing because it's up to, I guess, how Ted Racer decided to count the front line and who controls what hex. But historically, the Germans had either 0 or 1 morale points at the end of the game. So whether or not 1918 Storm of the West has the historical victor being Germany or not comes down to like a knife edge, thread the needle. It could kind of go either way, but obviously the Allies won the war, so make of that of how you will. So where do the Allies get 15 victory points taken from the Germans? Well, taking Strasbourg is worth 3, and that's way out in the east. It's way out in some mountains off in Glairland over here. But 3's not enough. You'd have to do very well. You'd be looking at taking Strasbourg. You'd have to take Metz. Saint Mihiel is actually controlled by the Germans at game start, so assuming you picked that up, you'd be at 7. Then you would have to push further in. Luxembourg is worth 2, so maybe you've gone out that far if you're really in the southeast quadrant. So that gets you 6, 7, 8, 9. You'd have to do much better. You could get up to 10 with Sedan, but basically you're almost guaranteed going to have to hit in more than one place to succeed as the Allies in the game, in the end game, right? So the Germans can try to do a knockout victory. They need to reach a threshold, but then they need to hold. As the Allies, you need to survive in the early game, and then you need to go all out. And I feel like you have to go more all out than even the Germans. So what about the center sectors? Well, in the center sectors, the Germans only have St. Quentin. That's worth 1. So you're going to have to probably pursue a very historical counteroffensive in the north in order to make up the points. And it's in the north where there's just a lot more. So God, I'm never going to say that. Maubeuge. I'm sure someone's going to say it in the comments. You're going to give me crap. That's okay. I like you anyway. That's worth 2. Cambrai is worth 1. Lens is worth 1. Lille is worth 2. Mons 1. Charleroi is worth 2. If you can get into Brussels, gosh, that's worth 2. Ostend is worth 2. Ghent is worth 1. So there's a whole bunch more of morale points behind the German line up here that are more likely to get you the points that you need. And I was figuring out where on earth did the front lines end historically. Well, they got basically to Sedan, and I would have to double check to see if they actually captured the city by the end of this, but let's say that they did. You would have Saint-Mihiel 1, Sedan for 2. They basically get back to the country borders, so they would also have picked up St. Quentin, so that's 1, 2, 3. That Maubeuge, I'm sure I can't say it. That's for 2. They pick up Cambrai, they pick up Lens, they pick up Lille, they pick up Ostend, and then they manage to get to Mons, and I think they get to the outskirts of Ghent historically, but I can't find a clear indicator. I'm going to have to check some of my history books if the Allies actually got a hold of Ghent before November 1st, because that's when the game ends, is November 1st. I don't think they had control of Ghent by then. So if I add up all of that, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think I'm missing one somewhere in here. Yeah, I think I am missing one somewhere around here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I mean, it's awfully close. I have to look to see if they took Charleroi. They didn't. So it's awfully close. Like it's the Allies, the Germans the Germans rather are at like 1 or 2 morale if you look at the historical front lines at November 1st when the game ends. So technically, and maybe Ted, if you're out there and you're watching this, you can let me know what you think. I measure that, I think, as a German victory in terms of the game. Obviously, maybe not the war, but I think that's it. Okay, yeah, just doing a recount, it looks like, it doesn't seem like the Germans would be at 0 morale if we look at the historical front lines at November 1st, 1918. So maybe the end point of the game is a little German-sided, but we'll see how that goes. The Allies will have to do very well and push even further into Belgium, essentially, to win the game. And the Germans just have to do fairly well in the early half and then hold out against the Allied offensive. So that's sort of a good little strategy overview of what the sides are going to try to do over the course of the game. So we'll finish that, and then I'll do some setup, and we'll talk about the setup when I'm done with that. Okay, so here's the setup, guys. This part of the video is recorded the day after the rest of this video. I realize this video is probably getting pretty long for an introduction, right? But it's just so much more than an introduction. It's an introduction and strategy discussion and close examination of the game. And now I've set up the game. Aha. So let's really take a look at what we got here. Well, I've got the admin markers set up. I have along the turn track all the reinforcements. I'll show you, and I've got some of the other markers off to the side there. So the American-Austrian Corps marker for later, the Stoss troop and replacement units, the out-of-supply markers, and then you can see the reinforcements. Now, let's point out that at the start of the game, The U.S. does not have any units on the board itself. They're they're either on their way to Europe or they're further in France, and the U.S. Military leadership has not released those units for combat, but they will start to trickle in. So you can see over the first few turns, we're going to get a handful. Around here is when we're going to trigger that +1 morale boost for the Allies. And then right, coincidentally enough, at the critical point of turn 9, which is when the whole game shifts, really, there's going to be a whole mess of U.S. reinforcements, and even some sizable ones that will still come through the next few turns after that. And so if I look at the way the chits all come out and how I did set up, like the sides seem kind of even there, or the number of units on the board are somewhat equal between the Central Powers, Germany, versus the Allies, but that will shift in the Allies' favor for sure as those guys come onto the board and get moved into the front somewhere. Now, somewhat like I've had difficulty with in some other games of this sort, where like the setup is a little more open. There's not a prescribed sort of way to set up. There's some boundaries there, but you're kind of left to your own devices. I am really uncertain exactly how I should have set up. And I'll tell you that if you try to set up units in every hex of the sector lines as the Allies, you're not going to have enough. So somewhere I had to pick, where the French are going to leave a hex empty. Now, the way ZOCs work, that's not a huge deal, but it could eventually become a problem with infiltration movement. So most of those gaps are down in the southeast here, where there's just not a lot of stuff to get or to go. And likewise, the Germans also had to do that. So they left some gaps along their line in certain places. I'm really not sure what to do about that. It was sort of, realizing I don't have enough to cover everywhere. The design notes or the strategy notes do describe, you can put 2 units in one hex so that they're stronger defending there and they project their ZOC, and that's all well and good. And that the Germans can kind of more easily do that at the beginning of the game because they're on the strategic offensive, but you still kind of have to create some line, or else you're not going to be able to really do anything otherwise, right? So because you can't move from a ZOC to ZOC, you can't ooze in this game. They're locking ZOCs, is that how I kind of look at them. You can leave that line open a little bit. But with the Germans having infiltration movement, they really couldn't afford to do that everywhere. And so they had to, the way the setup worked is that the Allies set up first, and then the Axis set up, or not the Axis, there I go saying it, I warned you I would say it. The Central Powers set up second. Germany sets up second. So, in some ways the Germans sort of got to set up in reaction, but gosh, I mean, I didn't know exactly where to put things, and I had to kind of think through, I had to outthink myself a little bit in terms of how to set up. So, knowing where all the victory points are, or rather the morale points, hexes are, obviously the Belgians are way up here in a couple of hexes where they have to go. The British are all along here where they have to go. I basically doubled up in places where the Central Powers would set up with a 3-to-1, 3 hexes to 1 hex attack, and kind of doubled up where I could, or put stronger units, and I think it's about as good as it's going to get. I couldn't set up the cavalry or the tanks on the front line, so they're just set back a little bit, but they'll eventually move forward. Be that how it is. And then for the French, I mean, likewise, I just sort of set up as best that I could. And the lack of units down in the southeast is just like, okay, even if the Germans for some reason really committed down there to take Toul, Nancy, and Epinal, I mean, it would be a valuable grab, but once they take those areas, it's not like they have, there's just so much space to cover otherwise that it would be really hard for them to make dramatic gains after the fact. So we sort of played it out and said, well, there's going to be less focus there. When I set up as the Germans, I mean, I sort of took the same thought here, right? Like, I'm going to put my weaker on attack trench units, which are 143 value. I'll zoom in so you can kind of see that. I've predominantly put my weaker trench units down here, more as a defensive measure. We want to protect Strasbourg, we want to protect Metz, but that's not where the majority of the action is probably going to end up being, so it's going to be a little more static, and we can be a little more, I mean, I guess lackadaisical down here. I did chuck a unit in this hex because that's Saint Mihiel, which is worth a morale point, and just because we're going to be against the clock at some juncture, we don't want to have anything that's going to be a freebie to the Allies. The Germans then have a whole bunch of assault units, and it's not like I didn't feel like I could just say I'm going to put all the shock troops in one area. I kind of had to distribute them, and what I'm trying to think through is like really I'd rather have an assault unit almost every other hex, so that I could do massive attacks across the line, because in the first turn the shock troops get bonuses. But I don't even have really enough units that I could like convincingly set up every other hex and assault unit and provide that bonus across the board. I just sort of had to say, okay, well, I'm going to have a whole bunch of assault units together in a row, just because that's where they kind of have to go. Like it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how I want this to operate. So for sure, I'm just going to say out of the gate, my setup here could be very bad. I really don't have a concept for knowing. This is my first time playing this game, so I really don't know. But I'll tell you what I'm thinking. So if I were able to break the line here and could start infiltration movement and work our way down here, we could sort of cut the French line in half and sort of really make over here less relevant, and then sort of just cause chaos. And if we combine that with a push along here, which is pointed at Paris, we can at least cause some havoc and pick up a few morale points in the center sector. All supporting Big Bertha there, which is placed in that hex, and with the optional rules, we'll be shelling Paris throughout the game as I can hold it. What I've tried to do is put additional focus up here. So I have several assault units. I maybe, before this video, or after this video and before our turn one, beginning to actually play video, which will be a separate video, I might still swap out some of these regular units with assault units from down here. But I'm thinking I want to make a serious attempt at a knockout blow by taking the channel ports in this whole sector. I think I might want to try to do that. There's a lot of incentive to. Maybe if I push too hard, I'm going to set myself up for really bad times later in the game. But this being an exploratory game, I mean, it's worth a shot. So that's why I have our artillery group counter there. It's going to support combats in this general area. We're going to look to break the British line and then be looking to push our way through here and try to get to those ports and cause all that havoc as much as we can, or at least put the Allies in a position where we can be pressing into this zone. And if we take all that stuff, we might not need to worry about Paris or anywhere else for that matter. So that's kind of the gamble I'm taking. Now, historically, I think what the Central Powers did, and I'm not like a super expert on this topic, I sort of know what all went on, is that the Central Powers, originally the German plan, Ludendorff, I should say, this is the time frame here at the beginning of the game of what is called the Spring Offensive, the Ludendorff Offensive, the Kaiserschlacht, that's happening now, right? And historically, I think what they did was they had Operation Michael, which aimed to kind of hit here and disrupt the Allied sort of hinge between the British and the French, smash here, and then you had subsequent operations like Georgette, which attempted to try to, sweep up this way. And then I think there were a few other operations, and one of the criticisms in the history books on this is that it appeared like the Germans didn't have a really clear, cohesive strategic plan. And I'm not sure that I have a cohesive strategic plan, so maybe that's spelling doom from the outset. But my plan is probably going to be a little bit different. So rather than smash through, well, I'm going to try to hit through here, yeah, I guess, and make a push for Paris if it's possible. But really, I think my main focus is going to be defeating the British in the north if I can, and make their whole situation untenable, because if I can take out their supply capability for the British, then they're going to be halved on defense and attack, and so any other British forces down here are going to be at a tremendous disadvantage. So my focal point is not necessarily going to be here, it's going to be up here, and we're going to do a narrower drive to the English Channel is my hope. Again, I might need to rearrange where some of my assault units are. I mean, for the life of the assault units, I want to use them as much as possible where they're going to be of value. So if there's a lot of opportunities for infiltration movement, then I want to make sure I'm getting the most bang for the buck, because I mean, the reality is there's only going to be so much infiltration that you can even accomplish up here. It's not a huge amount of space, but we'll see. There's one danger to this plan, of course, and that is starting next turn, after the first turn, we have the potential for wet season. And as I look throughout several of the early game turns, a lot of our offensive, there is a chance that all of this becomes marsh. And that could dramatically affect our ability to make the gains here. And of course, it's like that. It makes total sense, right? It's the gamble here. I'm going maybe for the big show. I want to take those channel ports. I want to win big. But there's tremendous amount of risk. If the weather was going to be very wet, that could hurt us. Focusing there might mean that down below we've got issues. And while we have plenty of assault units, the allies do have armor that they will use, and they're going to continue to get more advantages in that space over time. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Now, the British air is back here. I just have them sitting in the English Channel so that I can see them well. The German air is sitting in the Ardennes forest, just so it's easy and out of the way. And as they're used, we'll use them. Everything is pretty much set up. So I think I'm good to start playing. I'll do that in the next video. And I will say as a closing statement, yes, the counters are maybe a little too big for the hexes. If I trimmed or clipped the counters, that might be a little bit better in terms of spacing. But these counters are such nice quality, I don't want to do that. But it is tough. It don't fit perfectly in the hex that they're in. Along these front lines, they're kind of bumping into each other. So that's one thing that's kind of I don't know, it's not a huge bummer. It's just one of these things you have to kind of fight around. But everything's pretty high quality here otherwise, so I don't know, not a big deal. Okay, well, there you go, guys. A very long introduction, a long discussion on strategy and evaluation of the game map and what that means for our playthrough. And we've got the setup done, or at least done enough that, again, sometime between now and the next video, I might adjust a few German units. Just trying to, again, think through how to use these assault units most effectively. I'm still not 100% sure of some of that, but we'll figure that out as we go. But yeah, we'll check it out. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Long time coming. Long time ago we started looking at this. Now we have it and we're ready to get going. So see you in the next one, guys. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more, hit subscribe so you can get awareness of the next video when it comes up. And until next time, guys, take care. Keep on gaming.